Welcome. I'm Carl Frederick, and I will be interviewing individuals for Kenosha Voices, an oral history project of the Kenosha County Historical Society in conjunction with Kenosha Community Media. I have worked in newspapers for more than 40 years as an editor and a reporter. 38 and a half of those years were at the Kenosha News. I am also a member of the Kenosha County Historical Society Board. We hope you enjoy these programs. Today I'm talking with Louise Mattioli, a retired Kenosha Unified School District teacher and administrator. Welcome, Louise.
Well, welcome. Thank you.
How did you become hired by KUSD as a teacher? When was that?
That was in 1969. I had gone to UW-Milwaukee, and during my senior year I saw that there was an opening for a French teacher, and I had majored in education, French emphasis, English emphasis, and so I applied. Tremper, it was interesting because my senior year in high school is when Tremper and Bradford split into two, and I remained at Bradford. I was in that district. And Tremper was relatively a new school, and the principal of Tremper at the time was Dr. John Hosmanic, who became later the superintendent. And he was such an interesting man, and I had known him a little before, and I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to work for him? And so I sent in an application, a handwritten one at the time. Now there's an online process for the same thing. And when I came home for Easter, he asked me to come in for an interview, and by the time I got back to my apartment in Milwaukee, there was a letter that said I had the job. So I had a job before I even finished my degree. So it was really neat.
How did that come to be? How did he decide that you were going to be hired that quickly?
Well, you know, having been an administrator and thinking about building a team, I was the exact opposite of the other teacher. I was totally different. And at that time at Tremper, French supported 2 full-time teachers. That were that many students taking foreign language, that particular one. And you know, when you teach an encore class, a class that kids have to opt to take, they don't have to be in a foreign language unless they're going on to the university. You really need somebody who can motivate students to continue to go on. And that sort of became my job because I got to work with the kids in year 1 French, in year 2 French, in year 3 French. And the other teacher, who probably at the time had a lot more content knowledge than I did, she was much more of an intellectual than I was. And so we worked together beautifully because I kept them interested, I kept them motivated, and they went on to 4th and 5th year French. And you asked me, John was pretty smart, and he probably saw that I was sort of a spitfire kind of person and liked to work with people, and I think that's probably why he hired me. But what was interesting was that I come from an Italian family, and the name Cavelli, that was my maiden name, had sort of a reputation in the town. And my little Italian grandpa said to me that summer, he said, "Do you know Louise?" He said that some guy by the name of Hosmanic called me, and he wanted to know if you came from my family or another family. And I told him, no, Louise is my granddaughter. And I thought, isn't that an interesting way to check my background? Because today we use other kinds of means to do that. But when I say John was an astute person, he wanted to make sure that my family had a good background, and they did. My family actually didn't have many relatives in Kenosha, so we were not of the other family.
Okay. Why did you decide to become a teacher?
Oh, because I'm such an interpersonal person. You know, I think one of my strengths is I'm intrapersonal. I know myself, and I'm happiest when I'm with people. And I'm happiest when I'm learning. And I'm happiest when I'm sharing and giving and being teaching other people. And I knew that when I was young and I was a babysitter. I would make like little lesson plans to bring to the kids before I went there and worked with them. And I just knew that that was me. I was born to be a teacher. And I want to tell you, I loved every minute of it. And I really believe that really good teachers are born. They're passionate about it. And I don't think that I ever went into my classroom one day not wanting to go. Now, there may have been problems and things I had to overcome, and you know, that's how it is in any profession, but teaching was my calling, and I always knew that.
Fine. And when did you decide to go to administration? What was that like? 'Cause how long were you in the classroom?
I was in the classroom for 23 years. And you know, when I got to be around 40 years old, I think something happens to a person. I found that as much as I loved the classroom, it was no longer enough for me. I needed something more. I mean, how many times can you teach the same thing over and over again? And you know, you try different things and you teach in a different way and you learn and you grow. But I needed something more. So I began to get involved in teaching my colleagues after school, things that I had learned, and working with my colleagues and doing professional development, staff development, not only at Tremper High School, but at the district level. And Tremper at the time, when I was around 40, my mom died, and my dad had already passed away, and it was sort of a change for me because we came from a very close family. And I happened to get a principal at the time at Tremper that recognized in me things that other principals did not. And he's the one, Dick Regner, that encouraged me. And he moved from Tremper High School eventually to the central office, the head of curriculum and instruction. And he called me and said, you know, Louise, if you want to change for a little while, for a couple of years we have a teacher consultant position in what we call the secondary talent development teacher consultant, which was a job that required me to work with all the honors teachers at the secondary level and try to strengthen our honors program. And so I did that for 2 years, and I went centrally. And you know, when I went centrally, I found out things about myself that I never knew. I was highly organized. Even though I'm a much more random person, I'm very organized, I'm very strategic. I was able to overcome problems that with ease. It was easy for me to do that, and I had learned so much about leadership when I was working centrally, and that stimulated me to go on to get my administrative degree. And so I went to school at night, and I thought I wanted to become a principal, but I loved professional development. And so after 2 years, I went back to Tremper, mostly because I missed kids. I really did miss students. I missed that interaction. But you know, when I went back, it wasn't the same. I had grown. I needed something more. And so it happened that after 1 year, they needed someone to take over professional development. So they said, would you like that job, Louise? And I said, yeah, I'd love that job. And so I went centrally to become the teacher consultant for professional development. And we had a new superintendent at the time, a man by the name of Mike Johnson, who really helped me to learn and to grow as well. I really respected him, even though he was much more of a business mind than an instructional kind of superintendent. And within a couple years, he gave me an administrative job. And so that's how I left teaching and ended up eventually as the administrator for professional development. And I started as a teacher consultant. I became a coordinator, and I moved myself up to the director of professional development. And initially, when I took the position, I was over staff development for the whole district. That meant everybody from a bus driver the Jelco bus drivers at the time, all the way to administrators. I was responsible for their continual learning. And there was one person with a half-time secretary. And it was overwhelming at first. And I'm not ashamed to say that the first year I'd come home and I'd sometimes cry to my family. I don't know if I can do this. I mean, this is overwhelming. And then Dr. Johnson called me in and said, you know, Louise, I need someone to take over library media and instructional technology as well. I had no background in that. And yet, you know, I thought, well, what am I going to do? He said, it won't last long. It lasted 3 years. But with that position, I inherited 85 people, and I was able to grow my staff in professional development. And so I did it. It worked out because I had some really good people that were at my side in library media and instructional technology. And eventually that went away, and I built the program for professional development. And I really liked it. I ended my career as the Director of Professional Development for Kenosha Unified.
How long did you do that?
18 years.
18?
18 years.
18 years, okay.
18 years. And you know, the people that work at the central office get such a bad rap from the schools many times. They do not understand all the support, the hours and hours of support that those people put in to make sure that we do the best that we can for young students. I didn't when I was a teacher. And in that respect, I think I was really lucky to see both sides of, you know, of the aisle. When you're a teacher, you're paid the same as every other teacher. Your workload may be a little different. There's no comparison in terms of workload between someone who's teaching a process like gym. You teach a lot of procedural knowledges. Basketball, there's this procedure, that procedure. And what you have to do to prepare for that is so much more easy than what a history teacher has to do to make sure that kids make meaning of a bulk of information. It's amazing the difference. But the gym teacher pays for it in all the extra time that they spend at school, because most of them are coaching for very, very little money. You know, in music, the music teachers, you know, they have to see 120, 30 kids, sometimes 80 kids within a classroom, and have to make, you know, so there are all sorts of things that make the job equal, really, when you're a teacher. But when you work as an administrator, it is difficult, much more difficult. I never knew what the political side of education was like, and it was tough. You know, we've had people that, you know, right now we have issues across this country with COVID and masking, and school boards are requiring things that maybe teachers don't agree with. I mean, if I were teaching now at my age or even a little younger, I'd want the kids masked, and yet we have a lot of parents that are screaming that they don't want kids masked. Well, I'm sort of immunocompromised because of my age. That's why a lot of teachers say, you know, kids come unvaccinated, and teachers say, I don't know if I want to be in that environment with kids that are unvaccinated. And we have so many social issues. The schoolhouse is a reflection of society, and society has issues today that they didn't have in 1969, 70, when I first started teaching.
Tell me a little bit more about staff development. Did you, this night study, was that part of staff development for you, or did you go somewhere?
Yeah. You know, I tell everyone that when I observe teachers, and since I've retired, and even before that, I supervised student teachers at, or we call them now teacher candidates at Carthage College, and shared some of my knowledge with them. That's how I tried to give back to my profession and to Kenosha Unified and to Carthage, because they've been very good to me, all of them. I keep telling people that education is so much better now than it used to be, and that's because when I first started teaching, we had not researched the brain and understood what we know about learning like we know now. PET scans and brain scans have taught us so much more about how we learn. For example, we know that a person's brain can only retain 3 to 7 bits or pieces of information. That's why you have 7 numbers in a phone number. That's why you have 6 numbers in an address. So teachers now, knowing that and understanding that, had to be taught that when you are teaching a bulk of information or you're given a unit to teach, you need to, what we call, chunk that information. Chunk it in pieces that kids can understand. And so when you plan a unit, you plan for different chunks of information at different times. We also know from brain research that we retain what we learned first, the best, what we learned last, second best, and what comes in the middle, we tend to forget. So that when a teacher's teaching a unit, okay, they can review last, first, second, and they spend the bulk of their time trying to review with kids all those chunks of information that they learned in the middle. And those kinds of things were important for teachers to understand and learn, as well as learning to understand that teaching math isn't just teaching computation. We're trying to teach kids how to think mathematically. So a math teacher at the elementary level now, when I was a kid, they said, now, you memorize 5 times 3 is 15, okay? But the way my brain learns that and the way your brain learns that may be different. You may come up with the solution to a problem in a much different way than I do. And so we're trying to teach teachers now to teach the thinking process by asking kids to share how mentally they came up with that answer. So that when you walk in schools, teaching isn't the way you and I experienced it. And I think parents this past year with kids home, struggling with learning because they didn't have their colleagues next to them, they didn't have the teacher right there, and relied on parents, found it very difficult to help their kids or their grandkids or their nieces or nephews, because what we're trying to teach is not only the content but the thought process that goes along with it. And I think the jobs in our century now demand that. In 1969 and 70 and up to the 80s, my students at Tremper, who were not really motivated to be in school, used to say to me, Mattioli, I don't know if I'll take this class because I like you, but I don't know if I'm going to go to college. And I'd say, but college, what you learn is more than just about, you see the world in a much different way. It's so good. And they'd say, yeah, but I could go work at the Motors, American Motors, and I can make more money than you do. And those jobs do not exist anymore. They do not exist anymore. You really need to understand and think at a higher level. And so we're trying to teach kids the thought processes, compare, contrast, analyze. In science, we're not just teaching science anymore, we're teaching the scientific method. And we're trying to get kids to understand, maybe if kids understood how important it is to go through the process, the scientific process, we would have a lot more people that would buy into the fact that, when a drug comes out, like all of the vaccines for COVID, they would understand how difficult it is for Pfizer or Moderna to say, this is okay for a early child, a young child, to take this medicine. They don't understand how things change as we learn and we grow. And I think in education, that is one of the biggest changes.
Okay, so, excuse me. So, yes, you said that's one way that education has changed since you're being in high school or starting to teach. Is there any other types of things that have changed a lot during the course of your teaching and then
Sure, when I first
administration?
started to teach, they gave me a key and a book, and I used to teach by the book. Today, we now have identified in every content area what kids need to know and be able to do. We call them standards. And the standards have been articulated at the national level in CTM, for example, in mathematics, the National Council of Teaching of Mathematics. Each state has done that, and each school district has done that, and they all align. And so I keep using math as an example because it's pretty easy. Say, for example, in first grade, and I don't know if this is a standard in first grade, one of the standards would be that children should know by the semester what a ruler is and what the measurements of a ruler are. And so one of what we call a benchmark would be that by the end of week 3, a student should be able to know what a half an inch is and an inch is. And we have tests that measure at the end of a certain amount of time all of these skills that are articulated in all of these subject areas. And at the elementary level, for example, we administered, I don't know if it's still called that since I retired, but we had what we call MAPS testing periodically, the measurements of academic progress, and we administer those tests to students. And teachers gather together, they look at what they taught well, what they didn't teach well, and they try to improve for the following year. So we're looking much more at achievement or lack thereof, and we're putting all things in place for those kids who are not achieving. This past Sunday in our local newspaper, John Bardine's school, Curtis Strange Elementary School, there was a whole article about what he calls the power hour. He gets extra money from the state because his school has many students who are underprivileged. And he's using part of that money to hire his staff to come after school and to stay for an hour or 2 hours and to work with kids who are not progressing as well in certain areas. He calls it the power hour. And as you read the article, you understood that, the parents are happy with it. They want their children. They're willing to come later on to pick up their kids. And it's working very well. So we do a lot more what we call interventions. We do a lot more differentiation. When you walk into a school building today, it doesn't look like when I was in school. I used to get yelled at. John Hosmanic used to come past my door. Elvin Cranian used to come past my door because I was loud. I'd have my kids up doing stuff. That's what classrooms today look like. Because learning is social. Learning is helping kids make meaning of what they're learning. It isn't sitting in a row like I had to do and staying quiet. And in those days when John would say, "Louise, you're so loud. These kids are loud." Well, kids are loud all over now, They really are, and that is a good thing. And with the advent, Carl, of technology, wow. There are blackboards in our schools, or whiteboards in our schools, but they're not even used. We've got Promethean boards that demonstrate for kids. They don't have to listen to my accent in French now. They can listen to the Promethean board to native speakers who ask them questions, and kids interact with the Promethean boards, and it's amazing. And we also have spent thousands of dollars, not only locally but in the state, to get every child a Chromebook. So kids now, Ralph Waldo Emerson said, books are the best of things, well used, abused amongst the worst. And I think that for years we abused these textbooks. People in Texas that wrote these books told us what we needed to teach. We now, the professionals, know what we need to teach because we've identified that. So we don't go, we use textbooks at auxiliary, but they can go online now to original sources and really learn about the Vietnamese War or really hear native speakers. So that is a huge difference. And again, all of that, all of this technology required professional development. There were many times when our students knew more about how to access information, about how to deal with computers than we did. And so we found ourselves going from a sage on the stage, like Mrs. Mattioli is going to teach you everything, to really a guide on the side. I learned along with the kids. The kids taught me technology. And that's the beauty. That's why I knew I wanted to be a teacher, because I'm a learner too. And I learned just as much as what I taught the kids.
But isn't technology kind of a double-edged sword?
It is.
What
It is.
disadvantages has technology brought into the classroom,
Well,
if any?
One of the things is, for a teacher, you have to constantly monitor that kids are doing what they're supposed to be doing. You did it before, but you had more control of that. But you've got to walk around all the time. The biggest problem I see as I observe teachers, and it's a huge one, is cell phones. We encourage kids to bring cell phones to school because they need to access information. If they forget their Chromebook, they got their phone, they can go on the internet. But what they can do with their hands, how do I know that if a kid has a cell phone in his pocket and there's an assessment we're doing, that kid, because they not like me, I have to look at all the letters, they can text their friends. They text their friends questions and they give them answers. And so that's part of the double-edged sword. Another thing, I think where we've failed with technology, and I really mean this, and I think this is why we have so many problems with social media, is we never taught kids to look at the source of the information they're getting. That is a problem. And if I had to, when I was the head of instructional technology, if I knew what I knew today with all of this crazy stuff that people tend to believe because they go to these crazy sources that are on social media, I would have emphasized looking at sources. I do not think we've done a good job with that in education, and I think we have to change that. And I take fault for that in my profession. I really do.
During your career as a teacher, you were a member of the Kenosha Education Association,
Yes.
and then you became an administrator and then outside of the KEA. Now, what was the relationship like between the KEA and the administration over the time that you were involved in KUSD?
Well, I will give Kenosha Unified this. I watched our sister city, Racine. I watched their school district go from a really excellent school district to one that struggled, and that's because the union got so very powerful. Do you know, in Racine there were times when they had mornings, they fought, the administrators said, our teachers got to get together, they've got to share, they've got to learn from one another, so we'll have a half hour or 45 minutes in the morning, and we'll start the school day later, once every 2 weeks, and we'll have our teachers talking about planning lessons together, learning. Do you know that the Union and Racine's told the teachers, you go in that room and you sit and you do not react. You don't leave your seat. And they did it. And eventually, it did not serve that school district well. In Kenosha, I have to say that the union went along with time for teachers to learn during the school day, as long as we made time for teachers to prepare as well. Okay, but there is a rocky relationship. It wasn't always easy. I had that issue of time, fighting for professional development time during the school day was something I was always involved in, and yet we compromised. Teachers now, I mean, it's just a normal part of Kenosha Unified today that there is time during the school year, during the month when teachers meet together and work on professional things that deal with instruction. Because we think the number one thing, the reason we're there is to help kids learn. It's all about instruction. But as I said before, when I went centrally and I became an administrator, I began to see the other side of the story. And I understood the process. Now, when I first started, we had teachers could go to a conference and they could get, according to the Department of Public Instruction, they could get clock hours. And clock hours, if they accumulated 180 clock hours, that would translate into a credit, and they could go up on the salary scale, okay? But as the director of professional development, I had to look at what it was that they were going to and what they applied. Did this apply to your job? Whatever conference, whatever. And one of my colleagues, when I was former colleagues at Tremper, he went and applied for clock hours for me to approve little classes he went to at Milliger's Garden Center, learning how to garden. And I thought it was a joke when I got this, because I took a lot of those classes. And I thought, you know what, you're the head of, well, I won't say what this person was the head of at Tremper. It had absolutely nothing to do with his job. So I called him up and I said, so-and-so, you gotta be kidding. No, I'm not kidding. So I learned a lot. Well, what does that have to do with you? Do you know, he took me to a level 2 grievance. That meant the first grievance with he and I and a union representative. I said, I can't do that. This doesn't even make sense. The second level grievance, I was in there with the superintendent of schools. We went out, we came out of there, and we were hysterical. Of course, he got denied. But you know what, Carl? That's the kind of stuff that drives you crazy. It drives you crazy. Or other things you get into that, you have to deal with the union and our personnel issues. And it's tough, It's tough to have to look at someone. I mean, I understand the other side of the story. I was one of the few people that was an administrator that had spent 24 years in the classroom. I understood all the issues in the classroom. There are a lot of administrators that only spend 3, 4, 5 years in the classroom, and then they want to get out, and that's what they think they can do. And they think that's going to be the answer to everything. It's tough. It was tough. I never worked so hard as I did when I was an administrator. I never worked so hard as I did when I worked centrally. And and yet I had a million people say to me, former friends, former colleagues at Tremper, other schools, Louise, you were such a good teacher. You did such a great job. Why did you leave? Well, you know what? I think I made a much greater impact. Long term, moving from one classroom with 160 kids to the whole district. And I'm proud of that. And I never will regret that, because I think I became a stronger person and a better person. And I learned to have the courage to lead. And I think there are a lot of administrators, a lot of leaders that don't have the courage. And I do.
Can you tell us any stories that you remember, specific stories in the classroom or during administration?
Oh God, there are a lot of stories. There are a lot of things that you come upon. I remember little Wanda. About my first year of teaching, Wanda came to school every single day with the same skirt and the same dress, top, same blouse. And you know, in French, I got a lot of kids that came from money. At that time, Tremper was in a wealthier part of the city, and I'd go shopping as a young teacher. I started out, my first year of teaching, 69, 70, I made $7,300. $7,300. I'd go to a shopping mall and I'd see a purse or I'd see shoes and I'd think, oh, I wish I had the money to buy them. And my kids would come to class with those shoes or that purse I wanted. So I had a lot of affluent kids. And this poor Wanda stuck out like a sore thumb. And yet, you know, she was a nice little girl, and one day I caught 3 of my students outside the door, because in between class we all were assigned to stand out the door and sort of monitor the hallway. And I heard them say, Wanda, we just love your outfit. Where did you get it? Making fun of her. And you know, it was gut-wrenching to me. It was, those kinds of things broke my heart. And you know, as teachers, you deal with the whole child. You deal with everything. A teacher's job. Every single one of those kids become yours. And I get emotional because I miss that. I loved every single one of those kids, and that broke my heart to see that. And I learned so much about other ways of living from kids. You know, I remember teaching an English class, and it was a social approach to English through literature. And I had a Muslim student in my classroom who was very bright, and I really liked him. But he would give his perspective of women that would blow me away. I mean, it was nothing like, you know, and the girls would scream and yell, and it was really great conversation. But I grabbed him one day and I said, you know, you're in America now. You really have to think about, you know, how you treat women. Women in America don't, you know. He ended up, though, going back to his country and marrying someone from there, and is very happy, has wonderful kids, doing well in school, because I see him all the time. But you know, you learn from all those experiences. And when I was young and single for a long time and teaching, there were things in my own personal life that I never would try to take out to kids, but you know, they would always make me feel better. You know, there's something about looking in the eye of a child that all of a sudden grasps a concept that you're teaching that is just so fulfilling inside to you, you know. And even today, like this past week, 4 of my former students, one of them owned a local art studio here. They called me and asked me, oh, Miss Mattioli, we're going out to supper, can you come? I wasn't able to, but you know, it's those kinds of things that really you pay off in 1,000 ways. And there are a lot of my friends have teachers. One of my best friends, Sue, her cardiologist is her former student. And her sister just had to have some work done. She had to have open heart surgery, and he called her every minute of the day, took time. I mean, it's those kinds of things that really make teaching a special profession. You know, we touch the future. We touch the future. and you know what? I've been in it all my life, and I see some of the benefits of some of those efforts that myself and a lot of my colleagues have put
Sounds
forth.
as if the socialization that you had or have still with colleagues and with students kind of describes the best part of your job.
It is. It is. It is. It's helping. It's nurturing, you know. And I really think that teachers today, even secondary teachers, are much more willing to show their vulnerability, you know, to disclose some things that, you know, are above board. But, you know, you have to be willing to be vulnerable. Kids will tell you things that just make you laugh, but they're very brutally honest. And I remember one of my boys. I came into school one day, and I had a skirt on, and the skirt was a black skirt, and it had beautiful, different colored ribbons that were horizontal. And I started the class, you know, in French, and he goes, "Madame, Madame." I said, "What?" He says, "You know, I like your skirt." He says, "But I gotta tell you, the skirt got those ribbons. It makes you look like this." And I started laughing. Another time, I walked into Walgreens the night before, and I saw this big sign in Walgreens that said, "Make your lips look sexy if you bought this stuff that you put on your lips." So I thought, oh, that'll be good. And I bought the stuff, put it on my lips, wore it first hour. My student Sanan raised his hand. He goes, "Madame, yeah, you okay today?" I said, "Yeah." "Why?" He says, "Geez, your lips. What the heck happened? They look blue." Stuff like that. You never forget. It makes you laugh, and there were thousands of experiences like that. I mean, I could go on and on and on. And that's what one of the great things was when I went to Carthage and I worked with aspiring teachers. There were so many things that we could share and talk about, and so many things they told me, experiences in school. You know, it's just learning. And young kids are, I love teenagers, and I love that time of their life, you know. It can be very challenging, but it's an exciting time, and they're really striving to be, and they're fun. And you know, when I was a new teacher at Trumbull, we used to have live bands come from Chicago, and I mean, think about that. And the teachers, we were all young. We'd be out there dancing with the kids at the dances, and it was just a lot of fun. It really was, and I mean, that's why I loved it.
Do you have a worst part of your job? Worst thing that?
Well, you know, I think teachers are looked at. I think the whole profession, from its inception in America. You know, in the early days, if you study the history of education in America, they used to take bums off the street to be teachers. Literally, men who were alcoholics, or, you know, they'd say, "Come on," because we think it's like anybody can babysit and, you know, and take these kids and do something with them. And then we took women. Basically, the profession was a female profession. And they had maybe a little more schooling than others. But from its inception, you know, I don't think education or educating was ever looked at or valued. And it showed in the compensation teachers got for years and years and years. I think that today, I think there are a lot of people that say negative things about our profession. Like we're tainting kids, or we're in there for all the wrong reasons. And it's tough to listen to. It's tough to hear. We'd have a day when we'd be off, you know, because teachers get certain days during the year they'd be off. And maybe I'd be outside raking my lawn, and I'd have someone stop. And this happened more than once. "Hey, I went to work today. What the heck are you doing? Why are you out here raking your lawn? Well, I had a day off today. Or, it must be nice to have 3 months off. Well, you know what? Teachers don't have 3 months off anymore. If they're going to keep their jobs, they're working. They're going to school. They're teaching summer school. The first 10 years of my career, I had to teach summer school to make ends meet. $7,300, $8,000 wasn't. I mean, I know things didn't cost as much, but you know, if you're a married person with a child or 2 children, it's very difficult to live on a teacher's salary, and it takes a long time, you know. And yet, I will say this: the benefits we have, and that's changed too, were wonderful. I mean, what my retirement is, we gave up money to get benefits in retirement. And so, you know, would I do it all over again in a heartbeat? I think my profession was great, you know, but it wasn't always easy for some of my colleagues that had extended families, bigger families.
Do you have anything else you'd like to share?
Anything else I'd like to share? Yeah, yes, I do. Kenosha Unified is an urban school district. It's one of the 5 in the state of Wisconsin: Kenosha, Racine, Milwaukee, Green Bay, and Madison. And a report came out this past week. It was a community report, which is Kenosha Unified's effort to try to really be transparent and to show our public what we're doing and what we're not doing, or what we're having problems with. And you know, when people say to me, why are kids not doing well? Well, we just had 2 years of kids not in a classroom, number one. Off and on, they were in the classroom with all that we had to do online. Kids were not face-to-face with teachers, and I think that showed in the test scores that we got from the state this past year. But one of the things that was striking in this report was that there are 9,244 students in Kenosha Unified, and of that, 10,963 are economically disadvantaged. And I cannot begin to tell you how difficult that is for educators to overcome, because those kids come to us so unenriched to begin with. Their home lives are sometimes a nightmare. We have to do trauma training in our schools with young kids. We have kids that are abused. We are forced now to report mandatorily. When I was teaching, if someone came to me, as a girl did, who said she was obsessed with sex, and she says, I can't stop thinking about it, and I went to her counselor, and the counselor would attend or call the authorities, call the family. Now you have to do that. It's mandatory that if somebody discloses something to you, or you see a bruise on someone, you immediately have to do that. And that gets into all sorts of issues. Okay, we have to do trauma training. We have kids that have issues with their identity. You know, what do you call them? They. Many of them want to be called they, LGBTQ young kids. Their parents don't want them to. And then they say, no, you're not allowed to, but the kid says, no, that's what I want to be called when I come to your classroom. How do you deal with that? You know, the issue of drugs. The issue of drugs is tremendous. And, you know, how do you approach a parent when you're a teacher? Say, I think that, you know, I think your son or your daughter. I told a mother one time, have you noticed your so-and-so's eyes are glassy? And she said, you know, I keep saying I got to take him to the eye doctor. Totally went over her head with, you know, you have to be careful. There are so many social issues. We are a reflection of society. We have to do ALICE training. ALICE training. If an active shooter comes into your building, I mean, those things take up so much time and so much energy. And for our inner city kids, the things that we have to do, we have to clothe them, we have to feed them, you know. It's just overwhelming. Sue was telling me yesterday, my friend, when she was teaching at Frank, that she had kids come to school in kindergarten, they didn't even know their name. There are homes in Kenosha where no one ever has a book. Parents are not home. We have to teach little kids who are friends of other little kids to call them in the morning, to call at their home when we know they're up and watching cartoons on TV because their parents are in bed or they're drunk or they're still in bed. We have to do all things like that because these kids come from some dysfunctional homes. Frank Elementary School, when I was teaching, had more what we call ins and outs than any other school in the district. These kids travel from one school district to the other. They're pushed all over the place. They're living in shelters. You know, it's very difficult. And to deal with that and to catch kids up and you make progress and then all of a sudden they're out of your school district, they're somewhere else. We have so many social issues. So that dealing with the social and emotional problems that kids come with, you know, we had, if anyone would tell me that in our school district we'd have a killing of a child with a gun that got into school. You know, to get into our schools now, you have to pass through a metal detector. You have to, you know, as a guest, I have to give my driver's license. We have to know every single person in that building. So there are issues that in the old days you never had to deal with that we have to deal with now. And because money gets tighter and tighter and tighter, we have to cut people that are almost essential. We have to cut psychologists. We have to cut social workers. We have to cut counselors. Counselors, instead of being at every school now, are at 3 different schools. And they're not there for kids when they need them. You know, we had a rash a few years ago of suicides. Kids that committed suicide. What that does to all the kids in that immediate environment in that school is unbelievable. These kids need help. And so the issues that an urban school district has to deal with are much different than a non-urban school district. And I think the University of Wisconsin Parkside gets a lot of those kids that are, they're proud, they call them first generation school graduates, but you know, their parents don't speak English. They come from our school district. They go because they don't have a lot of money. They still live at home. And even the University of Wisconsin Parkside has the lowest academic achievement of all the UW schools. And it's an economic issue. And you know, when the governor, who was a former superintendent, state superintendent of schools, says we have to have more money, even Tommy Thompson, who took over the University of Wisconsin temporarily as an interim, he's really fought for the universities to have more money. You know, you either pay for kids getting a solid education, feeling a sense of self-esteem when they're young, or you will pay for it dearly, 2-fold, 3-fold, when they're older and they become a societal problem. And that's what we face today. Over 50% of the kids in Kenosha Unified are economically disadvantaged. It's a different world, much, much different world.
Thank you, Louise,
You're
for
welcome.
joining us.
Thank you.